everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Fitness Education Series produced by the Australian Fitness Academy. It's like progressive overload for your brain. I'm your host, Tom Rock, and in today's episode, we're going to talk about fitness myths or gym myths. But we've talked about a little bit previously, but this episode is in relation to a literature article that has just come out this year, only sort of published within the last couple of weeks online, and I think it's quite interesting. It's come out of Austria, and it's titled "Knowledge of Gym Goers on Myths and Truths in Resistance Training." And basically, what they've done is they've provided a questionnaire to a large number of people who are attending the gym, so general population individuals who go to the gym and train, and they've asked them a number of statements and got them to say whether they think that's a true statement or a false statement. And it's quite interesting takeaways, and the conclusion we'll sort of get to at the end. But I think it's a interesting article to bring up the prevalence of myths in the fitness industry, and then how common it is for people to maybe not know the truth or not look into it themselves or not find the correct answer potentially and just assume what they read or the information they think is correct. And it's something that, as a fitness instructor or personal trainer, if you're currently in this industry or you're currently studying, it's always good to find the correct answer, ask questions, question things other people say potentially if you're not sure that it's accurate. But it can be a delicate situation trying to change someone's point of view or their belief about anything, not just fitness, but sort of something you don't want to go too hard, too early, or just turn people off, and it's generally not easy to tell people they're wrong potentially. But providing sources of information and things like that can be good, and putting into practice things in your own programming or the way you describe what's important, how they should train, what their nutrition should look like, all these sort of things can be guided by facts, and that can hopefully help them question where they're getting their information and maybe look into certain subjects a little bit more deeply if they're interested. But I thought it'd be interesting to have a run through some of the statements that are in the article, and I'll put the link to the article in the description of the podcast. So if you do want to have a look, you can click the link and find the article and have a read. But it'd be interesting to go through these and see what you think of these statements as you listen. And there's definitely nothing wrong with thinking, oh, that's not what I thought, or that's sort of gone the other way, because there's a lot of people that these myths are very common, and potentially our scientific understanding of it has only changed in the last 5 to 10 years. So how we get that information out there to show these new perspectives is important, and it's an interesting thing to see, and it's a good way to sort of keep improving your knowledge and your understanding of certain concepts. So we'll go through a couple of these, and I'll tell you sort of what the statement was and sort of if the majority of people got it correct. And they've sort of looked at if the majority in a statistical significant way was correct. So we'll go through that as we get through it. But the first statement was protein supplementation augments strength and hypertrophy. Augments just means sort of changes strength and hypertrophy, and this is in gym goers. So if you're training, does protein supplementation change strength and hypertrophy potentially? The answer is true, and 86% of people got that correct. So a majority of people, or the gym goers they surveyed, got that correct. So that's one for the fitness myth. They know that's true. The next one is timing of protein intake influences hypertrophy. And I think that's a really interesting one. There has been a lot of research in that over the last 10 years. So what do you think about timing of protein? Is there a specific time? Should I be taking a protein shake straight after a workout? Is that beneficial? Does that influence hypertrophy? What do you think? The correct answer is false. So that is a myth. So the timing of protein and its influence on hypertrophy is generally a myth, and there's a lot of circumstances around that in terms of you have to be meeting your adequate protein intake per day. But in general, if you're eating getting in your adequate protein intake, the timing of it is not going to have an influence on hypertrophy. And if you weren't too sure about that's fine. Only 35% of these participants said that myth was false. So 65% of them thought that was true, that the timing of the protein intake was important. So another big myth that is still out there and common in the industry. Creatine augments strength. So creatine potentially allows us to get improvements in strength. The answer to that is true, and a majority of people did get that correct. So 73% thought that was true, 26% thought that was false. So majority of the people got that one correct. The next statement is carbohydrates increase performance in resistance training. So does intaking carbohydrates improve my resistance training performance? What do you guys think? The correct answer is false. So carbohydrates are not going to increase performance in resistance training. Carbohydrates as an energy source are generally more going to fuel your aerobic activity. And they haven't been shown to sort of, I guess, improve resistance training performance. But in saying that, 75% of people thought it was true. So 75% of people thought that carbohydrates would improve resistance training performance. So if you got that wrong, you're not alone. So interesting myth. It is a myth, but a lot of people sort of believe that carbohydrates increase resistance or performance in resistance training. Magnesium prevents muscle cramps. That is an interesting one, and the correct answer is false. So this is in terms of resistance training and cramps due to exercise, and the literature hasn't really shown any effect of magnesium preventing cramps from exercise. So that's false. But 82% of people thought that magnesium prevents cramps. And there's a lot of marketing around magnesium, and if you're having cramps, take magnesium. But in terms of cramping from exercise, the literature doesn't quite back that up yet. It may change or may not, but currently, magnesium doesn't prevent muscle cramps from exercise. The next myth is resistance training reduces flexibility. What do you think about that one? So if I resistance train, do I get less flexible? The answer is false. So resistance training is not going to reduce your flexibility. So that's a good thing to know. But and 78% of people got that right. So that's probably a good thing that a high number of individuals understood that that's a myth. And if I do resistance training, it's not going to affect my flexibility. So one myth that's probably not too heavily in the industry yet, that's almost 80% believe, or you got that one correct. Low load resistance training is as effective as high load resistance training with regards to hypertrophy. So with low load, they're talking about the weight. So can I get same hypertrophy from low load versus high load with hypertrophy? And this is an interesting one. That is true. So low load resistance training is as effective as high load resistance training with hypertrophy. That's true. That was about a 50-50 split. So people weren't too sure which way to go on that one. I think there's a lot more that goes into hypertrophy training, but you can get similar hypertrophy benefits from low load versus high load. They didn't really specify loads and things like that, but it's 5 reps versus 20 reps. You can get hypertrophy from both. And then the next one is low load resistance training is as effective as high load resistance training with regards to maximal strength. So can I improve my strength with low load and high load? And that is a myth. So strength training does sort of you get more effective strength outcomes from high load resistance training, and 70% of people got that one correct. So the majority of people got that correct, which is good. Multiple resistance training is, I think it's meant to say multiple set. Multiple set resistance training is more effective than singular training. I believe it's meant to be sets. So multiple set resistance training is more effective than singular set training. What do you think? Is it better to do more sets than do one set? And the answer is false. It's not better. It's not more effective to do more than generally singular training. 90% of people thought it was more effective to do multiple sets. Again, you do get slight more benefits, but it's an overall program, and in the long run, it's not a statistically significant difference. So that's an interesting one. A lot of people thought multiple resistance training sets is more effective than singular set training. I believe it's talking about sets. I'll have to have a look into that one a little bit more. Resistance training to muscle failure is necessary for hypertrophy. This is another sort of common topic that gets brought up. What do you think? Do you need to train to failure to get to hypertrophy? You'll see a lot of people doing, whether it's drop sets, forced reps, negatives. Failure is very common, so a good one to look into. But if you think failure is necessary for hypertrophy, you would be wrong. So that's false. So you don't need to go to muscular failure to improve hypertrophy. So that was about a 50-50 split. 52 people thought it was a myth, so just erring on the side of slightly more. But in reality, it's still a big myth out there that you do need to go to failure, when in fact you don't need to train to failure to get hypertrophy gains. Resistance training over full range of motion is superior to resistance training partial range of motion. So should I go through full range of motion with an exercise? That is true. So full range of motion is going to be better than doing partial range of motion if we're trying to get hypertrophy. And 70% of people got that correct. That is a true statement, and a majority got the correct choice for that one. This was an interesting one. So men benefit from resistance training more than females. Do we think that's false? Do we think that's true? That's false. Men don't benefit more from resistance training than females. Females get just as much benefit from weight training as males. But interestingly, 64% of people, almost 65% of people, thought that men benefit more from resistance training. So it's interesting to look what the general population think benefit means, but in general, women are just going to benefit just as much from resistance training than men. So that's an interesting myth that's definitely still in the, obviously in this cohort of population or gym goers in Austria, that men are going to benefit more from resistance training, which is probably a stigma that's definitely going towards not so much, I would think, these days, and more women are getting in the gym and lifting weights, which is good. But yeah, clearly that is still out there. Free weight resistance training is more effective than machine-based resistance training. What do you think about that? Is free weights more effective than machine-based? The answer in this study is false. So you can get just as effective resistance training from free weights and machines. And that was about a 50-50 split. There was slightly 55% said false, so got it correct. So free weight and machine-based can be just as effective as each other in terms of resistance training. So that's good. People probably are starting to see the combination. You can use either. I think there's definitely circumstances when one might be better for different goals, but in general, it doesn't matter if you're using free weights or machines. You can still get lots of benefit from resistance training. So that's still another myth that people weren't too sure about, and it wasn't sort of a big majority getting that correct. But that was the statements they went with. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how you went and what you thought of them. Did you get most of them correct? There's a couple of ones that obviously different circumstances are going to mean different things are going to be correct for individualized clients and things like that, but they're the sort of general statements. So yeah, I think it's an interesting article, and they sort of concluded that there's an importance of scientific communication and getting these new findings that we get in the science implemented into the community, and just the general knowledge that we gain from science as we do study, and we get all this literature, doesn't necessarily get translated or communicated to general gym goers all the time. So it's important. I think that's why it's important for whether it's personal trainers or fitness instructors to always to continue learning, continue doing short courses, keep up to date with um, not necessarily current trends, but current research that's coming out in terms of programming, exercise selection. Obviously, we can't prescribe supplements, but what's happening in the industry and how can we best guide our clients based on the current research, not something that we thought worked 20 years ago and we just do it because this is what they did 20 years ago. What's the current research saying about different programs, different exercises, exercise selection, exercise volume, training for certain goals? How can we best apply that to our clients and potentially improve the knowledge of our clients so they can sort of reach their health and fitness goals faster and more effectively? But I thought that was an interesting article. It sort of highlights some of the myths that are still common in the industry, and that communicating these things to clients in a good way will help improve their knowledge. But if you've got any thoughts on this, guys, any myths that you think you see pop up on Instagram, social media, in gyms, you've heard people say things in gyms, or you've seen people training and wondering why they're doing that, send an email to tom@afa.com.au. I'd love to see what else is out there, what sort of myths we can bust potentially on this podcast. Happy to look into it. If you have any topics or ideas or questions you want me to discuss, send me an email as well. More than happy to cover anything you guys want to hear about. Other than that, guys, have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you all soon.